Welcome everyone to the Repurpose Your Purpose podcast. And I have a little secret. This is the very first episode I'm recording with a guest. I have no idea yet which number it will be on the podcast, but here you go. You're now listening to the first one recorded. So, why this podcast? As a career and business coach, one thing that I'm really interested in is how many experiences we all have around work and how many conversations and topics are really transformative. And I feel very often we have a limited conversation around these things. It's usually, money, how to get a job, marketing, these kind of things, right? So, for a long time, I've been wanting to have conversations about anything with anyone that I really want to talk to. But today, I am really excited because the first person that came to mind when I was thinking about who do I want to talk to, whose story do I want to share, is Ebony Williams, who's here with me. Thank you, Ebony. Ebony coached with me a couple of years ago now, and I since then I've been a huge fan of what she does. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about her, and then we're gonna start going really deep. Okay? So, all right, let me just get ready here, and here we go. Ebony Williams is a Black queer first generation woman who is also a licensed marriage and family therapist, social emotional healing arts instructor, and a trauma informed yoga teacher. Ebony earned a Master's of Fine Arts from the California Institute of the Arts and Master's in Marriage and Family Therapy with a specialization in African American Family Studies. Ebony is a trauma specialist who practices LGBTQIA affirming and culturally humble therapy. Ebony has a private therapy practice offering individual, couples, and group work that aims to be trauma reducing and healing centered. Ebony is also the founder of Root Wellness Healing, a leadership and organizational wellness consulting practice. Ebony is a mother of two beautiful children, and in her self care time, she enjoys time at the beach, reading, being in community, roller skating, and food adventures in Los Angeles. Wow, I'm so excited. Thank you so much for saying yes to this.
Thank you for asking me. I'm excited. This is going to be fun.
All right, so here's my first question for you. What I love about what you do is that it combines your expertise in different fields. You refer to this as having an interdisciplinary career. Can you share what you find most rewarding about it?
I think one of the things that I love about my career and that it's, the way that I look at it, definitely in the way of being interdisciplinary, is that um, there's no material that's lost, so to speak. So one of the things that I remember my mom saying is all experiences are materials for life, right? To be used in whichever way you see fit. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean like everybody wants all the material that they get, but I think what's great is that I have found that having different experiences in different fields, it doesn't just go away, it transforms, it transfers. And I can use all of it and figure out how they fit like into this cool little puzzle to connect with what feels right for me, to support folks in the way that feels most aligned for me, and then have this whole toolbox of things to pull from. So I really like that. I like that I can work in higher education. That's where my first job out of college was, in higher ed, doing program directing, program management and coordination around diversity, equity issues, right? And supporting students in higher education. And I can transfer that program background, having worked on the East and West Coast doing that work. I can transfer that to now supporting and consulting folks in their programming. who are in organizations, nonprofits that are trying to navigate how do you do trauma-informed programming. And I have that experience over here. And I also have the trauma-informed piece as a clinician over there, and I can bring them together in a unique way. And that's just so much fun because I get to use both both of these sets of skills, and I get to really support folks in a way that maybe is not so common that they might find regularly, somebody who gets the mental health piece and also gets the programmatic piece. So it's, I think, really rewarding for me in that way.
Yeah, I'm actually curious if that just came natural, like you studied that way, or if you felt that you had to choose. Because for me, for example, I always felt that huge pressure that you have to pick one thing
Mhm.
and leave out other parts of you.
Yeah. And that's where I think this piece about like nothing gets wasted, right? Nothing gets put to the side. Everything is useful. And a lot of times we talk about that in like resumes, right? Like, what's your transferable skill? And yet, a lot of times folks are funneled into doing one thing. My grandmother she's like, she didn't understand why, folks had three different careers or three different sets of things that she knew you have one job and you have it for forever, for the rest of your life. And I get that because that's how she became successful. Like that's what worked for her and also her generation at that time. Whereas now things are shifting, and I had to really try to move out of this thinking of I have to only do one thing and learn for myself that I could shift into many different areas and take all of me with me. Much of that came from um, mentors and meeting people who had done this, that, and the other, and they were finding a way to make it work. An example of this for me, which was probably the hardest time I had to navigate this, was when I decided to become a therapist and go to school for therapy. I had previously come to California to get an MFA in writing, and I was teaching like healing doll making, a process that I had developed. So I was doing this over here, and then I was going to do this over here. And at the moment, I was doing program management coordination work in higher education around LGBT, education and advocacy. So I'm doing these three sets of things, and I didn't actually know anyone who had mixed art and therapy who wasn't an art therapist. And so I really had to make some connections, and I found a program. It's called C. And it's a social emotional arts certificate program. And I was like, okay, these are the people who understand the mixture of both. And then I found there's like a conference, and there's a summit that happens every year in LA and in New York with folks who are doing this. And there's an international organization that is social emotional arts, and there are mental health folks there. And my world opened up because I had now examples of folks who were working interdisciplinary, in their careers, but also they were doing work that felt so good and so aligned and was so impactful for folks. So that helped me get out of the thinking that I grew up with, is you have to do only one thing, but you can do everything and bring all of yourself to the party. And it's like, so fruitful for the world and for, the inner self.
Well, so I'm curious to see for people who study therapy and the arts, or or can you be just one side and learn the other? How does that work?
So, to your question, like there are folks who are from a range of backgrounds, right? So in my cohort, there were folks who were dancers, folks who were They owned companies, like one person owned a skincare company, the other person was did advocacy work and was a writer. Like there's so many different folks, educators, um, mental health folks and professionals who all come together to learn how to use social emotional expressive arts in the work that they do and in support of the communities that they work with. So it's really, really amazing to learn the language of social emotional expressive arts and to learn the functionality, like what you're doing. Sometimes, and this was happening for me, I didn't realize what I was doing in the doll making process that I had offered. I knew how it worked for me. And I knew there was something happening with folks I was holding space for, but I didn't have the language for it. Um, and so the program gave me the language for it, and it also helped me see how it was a trauma-informed practice. So it was really phenomenal. And I'm grateful that I get to teach in the program now. So
Yeah, so I love that we're talking about this because, one thing that I realize more and more coaching people is that sometimes we really think that people make certain choices. Like it looked to me before that, well, some people are able to have the same job all the time, like they can choose it, right? Like, but then I realized, no, actually, when you're a very creative person, you can make that choice and be okay and happy. Like your
mm,
brain works a little bit different, where you have a higher need of learning different things, experimenting with different things,
mm.
creating things, right? We don't all have the same way of being and the same predisposition maybe of what makes us happy. I don't know if that resonates with you.
Yeah, I think it depends on like, I think there are a couple of pieces in there. I think everybody um, needs permission to be able to be flexible with themselves and to engage both sides of their brains, right? I think a lot of times we are, as people, depending on who raised us, where we grew up, how we grew up, the expectations, we're sometimes funneled into doing this or funneled into doing that, right? And we don't always have permission to kind of create and imagine, sometimes not even in childhood. And that's a challenge, right? Because then how can you move towards the arts if it's not supported in your school, if funding has been taken away from the arts? So I think there's part of that, but I also think that folks, if we were to give more of that permission, they would see that there are so many different areas that they can engage in, and creative people, like I consider myself a creative person, it, there is a need to, like, we see something and sometimes it might be like, I might feel like a little squirrel sometimes, or I'm like, oh my gosh, that's awesome, I want to do that, or oh my gosh, over here, because I can see I have a sight, I think, that might be different than someone who has other interests. They might have a sight where I don't. And so being able to feed that and explore that is part of what gives me life and makes me really like excited. But when that's really restricted, it's hard because then I'm not able to like really explore the world the way that feels natural for me.
Yeah, I can totally relate. Okay, I have another question for you because one of the things I really like, in one of your website you have this quote, and it's your psychotherapy website and has this quote that I love, and it says, "Pain can at times cause us to develop spikes to keep the world out." And I should say that this quote is on top of a picture of a cactus, okay, with the thorns. So let me reread it so it's clear everybody can have this image of the cactus with the thorn. Pain can at times cause us to develop spikes to keep the world out, to protect ourselves from further pain. Yet the cactus, in the midst of such suffering, can bloom.
Mm,
All right, so one more time. Pain can at times cause us to develop spikes to keep the world out, to protect ourselves from further pain. Yet the cactus, in the midst of such suffering, can bloom. So, this is a very, very powerful image, and I don't know, it really resonates with me. So, can you say more about your views on suffering and on healing?
Yeah. I mean, um, and I will say, like, my views on suffering come from sometimes a very Buddhist lens, but also comes from my own experiences, and my fascination with the lotus flower. And the lotus flower, the story of it is that, well, the reality is that it's the only flower that blooms and seeds at the same time. And it represents the simultaneity of life, so of cause and effect, and how these things are inherently connected, but also the story of the lotus is that it emerges out of muddy waters. So near where I live, we have these lotus ponds, and I walk over there. I walk with my kids, and we see that right now in this season, which is winter, albeit in California, it's winter. The lotus pond is really muddy, and it's very, all you see are like roots and all of this kind of like, it looks like it might be like dirty water, right? um and in the spring you have these beautiful lotuses that emerge outward. And so the idea is that the lotus that emerges out of this muddy water can have the power to change the environment that it is in, to clear the water, to cleanse the water. Now, that is a lot of labor and work, right? But at the heart of it, it's the idea that suffering transforms, and without the mud, there would be no lotus. Now, this is not me advocating for suffering. This is not me advocating for harm in any way, right? But it is to say that one of the universal uh realities of life is that we all suffer in some way, however we define that suffering might be different each person, but also change is the constant of the universe. And so all things can be changed and all things transform. I believe in that. As a therapist, I see that. As a person who has experienced different forms of harm, I believe that for my own life. And so that's how I walk in the world. And so when I think about this idea of transformation, I think about the cactus, and I come to the cactus as a thought so often that it is spiky and it is like, keep out. And that is how trauma shows up so much. Like, keep away, don't come near me, um, to protect. And yet there are flowers that emerge from the cacti, and it's beautiful. And somehow that flower was able to show up and to emerge. And I have felt that way so many times in my life. And so that's my connection to it. And it really comes out of my belief that change is inevitable, that we can create causes that have effects later on, and that we can emerge out of this muddy, really hard, chaotic space and have the light shine on us. We can. I believe in that.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I'm really with you on that. And one thing that to me is very powerful about this image you picked of the cactus is that it comes with a lot of, I think, self compassion and compassion for others, because when we're in that defensive state, we
Mm,
are rarely at our best. And
mhm,
I think for myself, I found a lot of um, understanding and forgiveness in that. When it comes from when I was in that defensive state, and I caused hurt towards others. I hurt other people, and same when I was hurt,
mm.
and really understanding, that not
Yeah.
just at an intellectual level, but at a level of, yeah, it's,
Yeah.
But the lotus flower too, it's beautiful. It's one of those symbols that is used so much and for a good reason. And even last summer, I meditated some days. I started to get caught up in my own thinking about the past and so forth. And I really started to do these meditations about being the lotus flower, and it was so powerful. And I
Mm.
didn't even know about the self-cleaning until just a few months ago, actually. So
Yeah.
I think that's one of those things. Yeah, beautiful. I really love that you use these nature metaphors, and I think you have even one more about the fern. But maybe when you tell us about your new project, you can tell us about that one because I love that as well. All right, let me see what other questions I have for you. Okay, so here's something that I think is a big topic of discussion, which is parenting and work. Okay, and I'm really curious about, well, first of all, you can maybe tell with everybody how old your children are. So, like how has that affected you, like in, in yourself, like working, right, as a working
Mhm.
parent, but also like as a practitioner. So has it changed or informed your understanding of your work as a therapist or as a consultant? So I'm curious about, this I know it's a huge question, but I'm curious about this.
Yeah. And I spend a lot of time thinking about it.
Right.
I do, especially like this being the second time around. So, my eldest, she is 4.5. And she was born right, she was 5 months when COVID happened. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about parenting and having to shift what I thought it would look like to what the reality was at the time, right? And holding on to the hope of change, and that, change was constant at that time. There was always a transition. There was always something new to learn, know, and adjust to. Um, Not to mention just the development of a child at that time. So I do spend a lot of time and have spent a lot of time thinking about parenting. Um, and then now I have a 9-month-old, and he is, you know, I have to go back and think again about what all of this looks like and readjust. And so this is a great question, because each time work has been different. I got licensed as a therapist before I had children intentionally because I wanted to have flexibility as much as possible and still do work that I love. Um, and I didn't want to have to worry about going through the testing and all of that phase, while being pregnant or while having children. Um, and so after having children, um, and being at this stage specifically in life with the second, I am reminded how much stuff comes up for me, right? Like as a therapist, and I've worked with children exclusively at points, where I'm working with children, with parents, with their families. And this was before I had children. And I was like, okay, now I understand in a different way. Didn't mean I couldn't help before, but now I have a different understanding. And I also have dealt with so much personal shame around moments that come up where I'm like, I should know how to do how to do this. I should know the solution to this situation that comes up, and I don't. Um, and that's because when they're your children, your own stuff shows up, and your own pains, your own triggers, the way that you were parented needs investigation. And so it's not going to be as cut and dry as, well, this worked for this child, or this is what this book says. It doesn't work that way. And I had to come to an acceptance of that. Um, so that's part of that. That's part of it. But also the demands of what work looks like in this country, what parenting looks like in this country, doesn't fit for who I want to be or who I want my children to be raised by specifically for me, like because it causes more stress for me. And that stress just flows over to your children, right? And so for me, having been raised by a single parent, understanding what it means to be a latchkey kid growing up, taking myself to school early in life, bringing myself home, taking care of myself in many ways. I want to create a life that my children don't have to experience that. Um, so I've had to make some decisions. I've had to make some shifts. I've had to not do certain things and do other things. And I think that has brought me to really focusing my career more so and realizing the deep need to focus my career on the experience of parenting, the experience of also parenting specifically for those who have experienced trauma, especially early trauma in childhood. And so, parenting has moved my work into a new phase and a new stage, which I'm really excited about. And there's huge need. Um, Sadly, unfortunately, there's huge need, but I want to meet that need because I've lived that and um I know that there can be some ease offered. I hope that answered your question.
Oh yeah, I mean, I have so many thoughts from what you're saying. I want to ask you about your project, but first let me just share this one thing that came to mind. Have you heard of this term, the economy of care?
Hmm.
And some people really talk about it, right? This idea that again, we always talk about the economy, like, and we leave out all the caregiving. I mean,
Yeah.
parenting, but also like when our parents get older, like there's a huge amount of caregiving, and we like talk and act as if that wasn't part of something really important. And people's like, like, so I'm very
Hmm.
passionate about this. I think, yeah. Anyway, without going into a whole other direction,
But
I want to,
it's
yeah,
part of that direct. I mean, I think that's
right, yeah,
really part of that is
right,
it's invisible and folks
right,
get burnt out. Like we're expected to be um we're expected to operate as what people call like good citizens, right? We're expected to be kind to each other and to raise children who are that way. And also, for folks who are caring for their parents to work a job, make an income, do the thing, and then do a second shift. Like it's a lot. And yet there's not the buffer or the support around them to create some ease for them so that they don't burn out. So I mean, it's a whole thing.
yes. Yeah, I think the thing that really that I notice a lot is that in the conversation, a lot of the time is how can we make it easier for people to work, as in outside of the home, like the real work, quote unquote, right? Instead of seeing that these are equally important things. And in fact, for some people, it might be more important to stay home, and for some people, it might be more important to be at work, or there might be different times in your life. And
Yeah.
so I just notice how the conversation tends to be that the important thing is work, and the caregiving I don't know if maybe that's how I'm perceiving it, but I often perceive it that way when I read things.
It's what
So
gets
yeah,
defined as work, right?
right.
Like usually and that's the invisibility of it, right? It's labor that is invisible because it doesn't get deemed as work, but it is, I would say the hardest work to do, right? Like caring for somebody else is labor. It's emotional work, it's taxing. I mean, imagine, and not that you have to imagine, but anybody, like to imagine you are on 24/7. No matter who you're caring for parents, you're on. So you have no rest. It's work. So I think there needs to be like a shift in how folks are seeing what work is, but also the value behind it, because the reality is that it doesn't get paid, which means that you still have to do other things if you are expected to, have a home, have
Yeah.
food on the table. And that is it's an unfair challenge, right? That folks are expected to meet and then have children who grow up to be kind and loving and present and available for, conflict resolution that is peaceful. That's hard.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. I can we have 3 more hours to talk about this? Okay. Because this is no, I this is so important. I think it's such an important topic. All right, but I want to talk about your actually new project because I think that um it goes to the heart of it. I have to tell you, I had never quite thought about it. And when you mentioned it, it made so much sense to me.
Mm.
So I really was wondering if you can share about, yeah, what you're embarking on as one part of your practice.
Yeah. So parenting changes you. And it doesn't, I was a full person before I had children, but there are very specific needs for the community of folks that I am moving into working very specifically with. So the new project is called Cactus in Bloom, and going back to cacti, and that name just came to me in relation to everything that we've been talking about, right? Those spikes. But for me, as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, it having children has always been um, both an idea of a joy and also of a very huge fear. And in working with folks who have experienced childhood sexual abuse on many different ways that it manifests and shows up and has been experienced, it is a gap in um, prenatal care. It's a gap in even fertility care. It's a gap in postpartum care and in parenting. There are specific things that folks who are CSA survivors deal with in parenting, in thinking, in going to an appointment, in getting I went through what's it called? Reciprocal IVF. And what that looks like for my body, for my mind, for my mental health, to get shots every day, 4 months. These are things that are not often um, thought about when folks are going into the fertility clinics, or even when you are going to get your OBGYN exams, in pregnancy, or when you go to prenatal classes. Personal trauma is not really brought up or thought about in how you then care for your own child and what your thoughts are going to be and what your concerns and your stressors are. Very different because it increases your risk of postpartum anxiety and postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis. Like all of this increases, and not there are very few people, if anybody, who checks in on you. And so I really want to create um, a space where folks can tell their stories about what they've experienced um, along their journey, their reproductive journey. The areas where there has not been justice for them, there has not been space for them, and the areas where they would like um, care providers to be educated about what their needs are. I've been fortunate enough to, recently been working with an OBGYN department to offer some of this information and share some of this. And it's been so rewarding to me, but they're also just hungry for more. So I want to collect the stories of folks and turn it into trainings and workshops and education for care providers, but also to create new types of prenatal groups, new types of parenting support, and be a hub for folks to get that care that is unique to their experience so that the generational cycle that often repeats does not have to anymore. And so that, folks can have somewhere to go to ask these questions that, you know, folks are not always equipped to. answer and or can feel a lot of shame for even asking. So that's kind of where I'm moving into.
I love it. It's, one thing that I really, that I hear as you say this
Mm,
is really the hope. Like it's we can heal around even our deepest trauma. I
yeah.
think it's such an important message that we don't realize that a lot of the time there's just no resources or we don't even know that these things exist.
Yeah, there's so much silence for many good reasons. And when there are children involved, that silence can be a part of how they become harmed as well, because childhood sexual abuse is often generational. And so in order to protect them and stop the cycle from continuing because of silence and because of very unique dynamics that are, present, that can be present, um, there has to be a space to go to. There has to be someone to talk to. There has to be, services that are unique to the need and to the population. An example of this is oftentimes what will happen is that there will be abuse that happens to someone and they have experienced it by a family member. What
Mhm.
then do you do when you have a child and that family member is still around? And you want to go to family events, but you're experiencing a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, heightened anxiety, because when a baby's born, everybody comes together, ideally, right? But that one person is an unsafe person for you and maybe very unsafe for your child. But you then have to navigate that. Do you choose isolation, where now maybe you haven't disclosed what has happened? So now you're put in the position to disclose that. Or do you choose to then kind of have your child around this family member, right? Many culturally, for many families, um, you might be choosing isolation because it's one or all, right? And so these are some of the challenges that folks are trying to navigate. Literally, like, how do I be around my family? How do I navigate what's happening in my body as a result of this trauma that has happened by this person, right? As you're having a child, as you're dealing with all the things that come with that. That is a unique experience and that needs some space and somewhere to go. So that's what I want to offer. And I don't know where that is offered in a very specific, grounded, accessible space, especially when we think about the intersections of, LGBT folks who are survivors and parenting. And we're also thinking about like, you know, uh, gender nonconforming folks, folks who are trans, who are parenting and navigating all of this. So there's a lot of folks of color, there's a lot of pieces in this that need space, that just, it's not there right now in this way. So,
I really, well, of course we will leave this and I'll have, everywhere I post this, there will be all the information to get in touch with you. But I'm really, really glad you're doing this because again, every time, I think we hear a lot about the effects of trauma
mm,
or the negative effects of things, but we need a lot more of this messaging and constructive resources and knowing that no matter what happened to you, you can find a community, you can find a space, there are
mm,
resources, there are things, for you to heal. So I love that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And one thing also that, if you have a little bit more time, I'd like to ask you one more thing. Yeah. One thing that really resonates for me that about your work, because it's something that's really at the core of my work, although my work is very different, right? But it's this idea that the client has their own inner wisdom and
Mm-hmm,
they have their own knowing.
mm-hmm,
And so I was wondering if you want to talk a little bit about that, how you see it. I talk about how I see it a lot and sort of like, yeah, what does that mean to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I conceptualize it as a very like visual person in my head. I see it as like a road. And this is oftentimes like with clients I work with, how I describe it. Like I'm a guide and I'm walking alongside you on this road. I'm not the expert of you. Like, yes, there are things I know, and there are tools I carry in my toolbox. And yes, there are things you know, and there are tools that you have in your toolbox. But my job in relation to that client is to walk alongside you. It's to challenge you at times, and yet we're walking along, and I want to ask you questions that might not always feel good, and sometimes they do, but the purpose is to pull out your knowing because you have it. And that includes body knowing, not just cognitive knowing, because our body sends most of our information, right? This is how we move, how we process things through our body. Let's get the body involved. So let's pull out wisdom from there. Let's listen to the wisdom and create the space for listening. And also so that there's listening between the mind and the body. So my job is to be a conduit to create some of that space, um, so that folks can hear themselves. And that's, I think, a humble place. Like I believe like one of my core values is being humble. And I don't know everything. There are things I do know, but I know that I don't know everything. And so I want to be humble in how I enter into, um, the relationship of care. Um, and that means that like that person's wisdom is what we're gonna work towards, connecting with. And I say that also with the knowing that trauma can be confused, like with knowing when it's not, right? Like oftentimes trauma can lie to us and seem as if it's truth when it's there for like the responses of trauma are there as a way of protecting, right? They're responses to something that should not have ever happened, but they're there to protect you, like hypervigilance, because you're going to be looking around now because you feel unsafe. Your body, your mind is trying to protect you from that thing ever happening again. So, yes, like it's there with function and purpose, but that's different than wisdom. And so I think it's important to help people differentiate the two and get to their like the wisdom that's really inside, separate from that trauma, so that they can operate from that place, not from the place where trauma is, as I say, like at the wheel. Like, but the person is fully at the wheel. Right? I think of it like the cactus and the spikes. Like the cactus is not the spikes. And we as people, we are not our trauma. So how do we start to like, you know, connect with that flower that might bloom and connect with that light within us that might bloom? That's kind of how I see this idea of the wisdom.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I almost forgot to ask you about the fern image. Do you
Oh,
remember?
yeah. So the fern, and this goes back to this project of Cactus in Bloom, the group that I hope that we, create out of it is right now I'm calling it Aya, which Aya is connected to the adinkra symbol of the fern, which represents resilience. Now, resilience is can be very triggering as a word because it's used as like, hey, something happened to you, you just get up, you bounce back, you keep going. When I talk about resilience, I like to think about it as an ancestral offering, right? Because a lot of times we'll talk about epigenetics, and epigenetics is the handing down of trauma. And we know that like that's not ideal. We don't want to hand down trauma, but it's something that happens as a result of, harm. But we don't always talk about resilience as a handing down of ways of healing. And so I think of this like my great grandmother who she would hum every night. And I would just like hear humming and humming, and I'd be like, okay, like she does just what she does. And then with my children, I think I had a moment and I was just like, okay, I can't. And I just found myself humming. And I was like, where is this coming from? I'm like, because I was really irritated. And I was like, okay, I'm just humming. And it was part of what she had handed down to me.
That's
And
beautiful.
because of my connection with like yoga and knowing about somatic practices, I was able to realize that, humming is connected to activating the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve connects with all of our organs. So when we activate it, we're actually, especially when we put our thumbs at that little dip in the back of our neck and we press up, we are massaging all of our organs, right? We are activating that nerve. And what's beautiful about this part of us is that it actually helps activate our parasympathetic nervous system, which is all about rest and restoration in our bodies. So by humming, that being my response, which was something I learned and was handed to me by someone who now is an ancestor because she's no longer here, that is part of my resilience. So the fern is a representation of that. And it was a symbol created, I believe, in West Africa. It's an Adinkra symbol long, long, long time ago. And there are a ton of these symbols. And I just love the reflection of what this space and group could be for folks who are CSA survivors and parents in order to help us all activate that resilience, not from a bounce back place, but from an ancestral place that we all deserve to access.
That's
So
so
more nature.
beautiful. No, I love nature metaphors. I really love them. So I think like one way to maybe wrap this up, I want to invite everybody to remember these three images: the cactus, the fern, and the lotus flower. So
Mm-hmm.
beautiful.
Yeah.
So, if somebody wants to be in touch with you and maybe work with you or invite you for a presentation or workshop, how can they find you and contact you?
Yeah, so they can reach out to me at or on my website, rootwellnesshealing.com, or for mental health, all the things, that would be Ebony Williams.com. So that's me. And my email, ebony@rootwellnesshealing.com. You can find me there.
And I'm gonna make sure to write all of this so people can see it as well, where the podcast is posted. And thank you, everyone. I want to, first of all, thank you, Ebony. It's been such a pleasure to see you again today and for being the first guest
I love
on the
that. I
podcast
appreciate that.
and sharing all your wisdom. And if you would like to be in touch with me, I'm Aurora Meneghello, and you can find everything about what I do at repurposeyourpurpose.com, one-on-one coaching, group coaching, or workshop. Thank you, everyone, and I'll see you at the next episode.